that has betrayed me once again. But finally, we managed to sort out the technical glitches. So, to jump off, because we have a slightly compressed time frame, I'm going to run through some of the news items that have been happening since the last time we did one of these, just ever so briefly. And in national news, we've got the Nkwenazi scandal still rolling out in parliamentary and judicial committees. It seems that they're sort of narrowing down on clarifying evidence at the moment, and by all accounts, we should know in the next few weeks or months whether there's going to be any actual prosecutions. It seems that Becky Cele is, getting away with whatever it is that he was up to. Mkhwanazi retracted an allegation against him regarding sort of funds that he was getting, and apparently it's due to a banking error. I think whenever I'm looking at one of these scandals, you never know because there's always factional stuff happening behind doors, and I've noticed that Mkhwanazi, if it subtly has aligned with that whole sort of Zuma-ish faction. I still think that what he's doing about Senzo Mkhunu is good because, frankly, anyone taking down a death squad for whatever reason is, on the right side of things. So, ongoing support from our side, despite various factional complications. Um, so yeah, the other thing, and this is going to be one of the biggest frames for our current our roundup, is the fact that fuel price hikes and the electric tariff rates are going up. So there's an overall cost of living driven by a squeeze on energy supplies, and one of the biggest ones driving this is, well, the war in Iran. We all know about this. We all know about the ongoing fiasco and miscalculation that the Americans have gotten themselves stuck into. Iran has a very deep weapon supply, and America and Israel's defensive capabilities, the stockpiles of defensive interceptor missiles are running very low, dangerously low, allowing Iran to strike a lot of targets, and they're managing to keep traffic flowing through the Gulf of Hormuz very, very low because, well, even if they're not hitting every target, it makes the insurance costs go through the roof, and no one wants to risk those charges on their shipping lines. So, yeah, we're facing problems. 15% of the world's energy supply, oil supply, goes through that little zone, so it squeezes the prices considerably. Um, this has also affected our fruit exporters. So, yeah, up to 90% of our shipments face delays or stranding, which is fantastic. So much for all of Mr. Steenhuisen's gains in that department. Um, so yeah, we could see a lot of spoilage and stock losses in citrus and stone fruit and all of the big cash earners for the Western Cape, which is not very nice. So now everyone's sort of holding out their hands for government support, and given that the main lobbyists will be Agri-SA and so on, they're likely to get something. Uh, Whether that's going to also extend to small farmers is remains to be seen. There's always little racial caveats to those payments. Also, just briefly, the post office is about to be liquidated, despite the original plan that is still on paper, actually calling for a bailout. Unions are busy rending their garments and gnashing their teeth in frustration, but it seems that liquidation is coming and their jobs are going to be ditched in favor of private sector acquisition of all of the main assets and services. So it remains to be seen how that's going to shake out. But yeah, it seems it's the end of the South African post office, however long that takes. Um, and then there's the one big thing that the DA has been rattling on about in Johannesburg, which is the Tshwane water tanker. So there's 777 million in the previous fiscal year for our emergency water tanker contracts awarded to ANC linked companies, which turned out not to own any water tankers. Shock. Shock. So they talk about water tanker mafia and everything, and this is going to be their big um, sort of target for how to push for votes in the upcoming local government elections, in which Helen Zille is aiming to take over Johannesburg. But I mean, again, one must recall remarks by Gareth van Onselen, who's been the biggest proponent of this being their key electoral focus, where he said, look, the second we get in charge, it's going to come to light that we need something like R1 trillion in order to revamp Johannesburg's water infrastructure. And no, there's no way they could get that money from. So it's just, they're, they're going to put a tiny little, finger plaster on what is a giant chest wound and hope for the best. So, I mean, that's probably going to be the end of the DA's ascendancy with that cycle. So, if they can't work some kind of miracle before 2029, Johannesburg, because it's almost certain that they're going to win enough of a majority to be the big party that calls the coalition in Johannesburg. I'm pretty confident about that. So the problem is, can they fix the problem? Answer is probably not. So that's going to hurt them in 2029. Um, as everyone knows, Jordan Hill Lewis is put to be the successor for John Steenhuisen. They want to wash away the stain of the enormous corruption and mismanagement in his department. But all of the nastiest aspects of his handling of the foot and mouth disease pandemic are just rolling ahead, and he's using it as an excuse to put forth all of the policies that he touted when he was at the World Economic Forum, such as the surveillance and reduction of herds of cattle and other livestock in the country. So, screw that guy. The new US ambassador has been summoned over undiplomatic remarks, basically because he had a go at us for, you know, expropriation, racial quotas, hate speech against, minorities, particularly white people. And so he's been summoned to explain himself, and who knows, maybe they'll kick him out and sort of go on. This seems to be a sign that South Africa is not particularly afraid of America, and we'd only be afraid of America if they were actually going to do something, and they don't appear to be doing much. But we'll go into that a bit more soon. In the Western Cape, we are going to get a parliamentary inquest into Western Cape farms, because there are farm worker equity schemes which are just falling apart despite state funding. Um, very little dividends being paid out. Still, there's still evictions of people who are no longer working on the farm. There's, still low wages because farming is a high risk, low margin enterprise. And there's a whole bunch of lefties who are looking for forensic probes. And I suspect this is part of the sort of slow moving general justification of, well, we've tried all the nice options. We need to take all your farms away now. Sorry, old chap. So I think, it's part of that greater sort of trend. The city of Cape Town has announced that they're going to have a 10% cut in the residential tax rate. So that'll be about 60% of our households will see a little bit of a reduction. But I think, I mean, look, this is a result of enormous pressure, because look, there's a big lawsuit at the moment against the way that they're conducting these additional fixed tariffs on everybody. They know that their budget is unsustainable, but at the same time, they're getting enormous blowback for trying to increase it. And the property rates increase has been irregular and subject to a lot of subjective evaluations that have, in some cases, tripled people's municipal bills and forced them out of their homes. So, yeah, yeah, it's not looking good for the DA in that regard. And I do wonder what effect this will have on the DA support in the Western Cape over the next few years, because they seem to be backpedaling very fast. Um, and then there's more corruption in B2 because there are three unqualified hires for senior fitters lacking trading certificates and driver's licenses, nepotistic links to the proving director, and there's a cemetery superintendent without the cry. What requirements do you need to supervise a cemetery? I'm sorry, I know that this is probably some kind of probably some kind of irregular hire, but still, I mean, do you really need a doctorate or some kind of diploma to clear weeds from a cemetery? And I don't even know where to go. We have a very, very stupid system in this country. Um, Now, a little thing that's very sad is apparently the blue cranes are being just wiped out across the grasslands and the wheat fields in South Africa because intensive industrial farming has basically eliminated all of their nesting grounds. It's no one, because you don't have these small farms that are trying that it's a family farm. You like the little area, whatever. Everything's becoming purely mercantile in nature, and so these little exemptions on tiny pockets of land where you get nice bird life and so on is just it's going. And this is really, really sad, but I don't know what else to say about that. Um, and Johan Rupert is apparently getting stuck in with a friend of his called Rurik Goebel, um, and a brother of Rurik Goebel, over conducting a multi-billion rand Stellenbosch Bridge luxury development. So Rupert's claiming that there was unauthorized attempts to sell land portions to a British data center firm, that there's board manipulation. It's all kinds of problems. We'll get into that in the print edition in the coming week, but it doesn't seem extremely likely that this is going to affect political things. Just keeping a small eye on the oligarchs and what they're up to. And then Drakenstein municipality are having a bit of a problem in that their public consultation, they were hoping to push people to attack Eskom for raising rates, but instead they attacked the municipality for increasing flat rates on people who are actually paying their bills. Um, so yeah, this is turning out to be a fiddly little issue, and I have a contact who's getting me some of the history of the rates in the area that come from the municipality in this regard, and we'll have a nice little analysis of what my corner of the world is up to very shortly. And yeah, so the as far as there's anything else going on, diesel shortages and stuff notwithstanding, I just have to mention that quickly, that this is not exclusively about the Strait of Hormuz business, because there are also closures of local refineries. This has been coming for some time. There's lots of problems with regulations, state ownership, mismanagement. And so we're having a local crisis that's doubling down on the international and national price squeeze. And we are going to have a lot of problems down here, with diesel going over 7 Rand a litre. Yeah, and then we are also increasing and accelerating the process of funded low-cost housing across Cape Town, with Alan Windy and Jordan Hill Lewis and Tasha Simmons cutting ribbons and celebrating the distortion of the housing market and the importation of further people from outside the city, which is likely going to have a rather is likely going to keep increasing property rates while increasing tax burden. But it's part of a national scheme that needs time to address all on its own. Yeah. So aside from that, I think that we can get on with our main items today, which Robert King and Leo Barnes are going to cover respectively, and hopefully respectively as well. Um, Before I get into some sort of rumors and shenanigans flowing around Stellenbosch. Uh, so, who wants to go first? Let's go with Leo.
Sure.
Hello,
So
Mr.
I
Leo.
think hello. So uh, it's unfortunately we didn't have the podcast last week, which was slightly more uh, prompt to when the news was announced. But we have the latest round of our GDP figures released by Stats SA. Uh, the fourth quarter of 2025. So we have the full coverage of last year's economic activity. Overall, uh, the economy grew by about 1.1%. So brace your head lest you get whiplash. It's was very proudly presented by the ANC, particularly Fikile Mbulula decided to do the rounds championing it. But now, unfortunately, this is a story that has just. I mean, you could run the same headline every single quarter since at least COVID, really going back to the global financial crisis. Nothing to report. I mean, there's just the growth is pretty much exactly in line with the overall population growth of the country. It's probably more accurate to describe it as maintenance rather than growth. But if we, you know, just look even just a little bit deeper into uh, last quarters, well, quarter five of 2025, quarter four of 2025, the numbers are just really quite minor in all aspects. So agriculture and forestry up 0.4% quarter on quarter, for example. You know, negative 0.6 in mining. Same thing for manufacturing. Very, very small changes in all departments because, as it turns out, pretty much everywhere is stagnant for the most part. Uh, and, this is not equally distributed across the country. The Western Cape and Gauteng in particular actually are growing. Probably, it's probably beyond their population growth, but it's difficult to measure sort of between census releases on that point specifically. But when we combine this in conjunction with the latest quarterly labor force survey releases, which were not too long ago, last month in Feb, uh, February, the Western Cape bounced back somewhat, or continued their bounce back, I should say. Growth by about 25,000 jobs in agriculture. Well, 1,000 less jobs in mining, 24,000 more in manufacturing. So overall, about 94,000 additional jobs to the provincial economy. It's not quite enough. It's better than nothing. If I was being incredibly optimistic, I would say that we have grown accustomed to half of the quarters being negative growth, half of the quarters being like 0.1, 0.5% growth. So, getting the news that over the course of a full year, the economy, in fact, didn't shrink on a per capita basis is, perhaps a little encouraging. But if we've seen a lot of speculation around the direction that the I'm going to say the ruling coalition wants to take the country with Mbeki and this as sort of inspiration and this sort of vision of a Jordan Hill Lewis, a Matsepe partnership, sort of steering the country back in line. If that's going to really take shape, if that's going to be something that has any chance of succeeding, 1.1% is nowhere close to where it needs to be. So once they do get there, it can't just be a continuation of what we've been experiencing so far. It's just, in general, I sometimes loathe when quarterly reports come out or we get the headline of 1.1% growth, because the truth is that economic success for a country isn't measured on a quarterly basis. It's not even measured on a yearly basis. You have to look at decades of performance to see whether things are actually trending in the right direction. And I just pulled up the data today. I did a quick back of the napkin calculation. Since Q2 of 2022, which was the first quarter in which the COVID lockdowns were gone, if I remember correctly, the primary sector, the sort of the sort of core of South Africa's economy over its history, had literally zero growth. The average growth figure on a quarterly basis was 0%. So, if this country continues along with its post-COVID trajectory, it's not going anywhere very quickly. And 1.1% over the course of last year is better than the disheartening thing is that it is better than what we've been accustomed to. But especially in Q3 of last year, where people were being, I would say, way overly excited about a 2% annualized growth rate, we are maybe slightly back. We're maybe brought back down to reality in that regard. So it's unfortunately the story on economic growth is that there isn't much. So in that sense, there's almost not much to talk about. I would give you a detailed breakdown of where the economy is growing. What movement is happening, but it's sort of not moving much in any particular direction. Some industries have been consistently growing. If you look at the financial sector, if you look at the tertiary sectors, those have consistently grown, because those are sort of the only places where you can get good jobs anymore, and that's where almost everyone who has formal education or any sort of skills go into, because unfortunately, unless you get a difficult to come by union job, the primary sector or even the secondary sector is not appealing for employees or employers. So if we're going to see any sort of development over this year, there needs to be some really quite drastic changes to the structure of, or certainly the government's approach to handling the economy. Which, I don't know if you saw, there was a News 24 conference earlier today which Cyril spoke at, and there's absolutely zero indication that that's going to happen. I won't delve into what he said, because I only caught a little bit of it, but it's just more of the same. So that's unfortunately. Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I remember
terms
one
of
of
lots of
one of
this.
the big indicators that somebody brought up. It was about a month or two ago. Actually, no, it wasn't that long ago. It was a few weeks ago. There was one of these sort of economic optimists that you get in South Africa. You get so many of these pointing out, "Oh, we finally sold more cars than we sold in 2007. What a milestone!" And then I just sort of did a bit of math, and I looked up well, how big is our working age population? I mean, it's increased by I think something like 60% since then, and we're sort of selling the same number of cars as back then. And if you look at that in terms of like actual broad economic activity, if you want to use that as an indicator, we are severely poorer than we were 15, 20 years ago.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
I
it's
did an
I
article
have a
for the
small
Cape
I have a
Independent.
small intruder here. I'll have to.
okay. Yeah, well, Rob, you
Yeah,
can say what you were about to say.
yeah, no, I did an article for the Cape Independent last week, comparing South Africa to Poland since the beginning of the 1990s, and it's very interesting. I think it was this week, it was announced that Poland's economy is now topped over $1 trillion in equivalent value. So if you do that comparison over the last 30 years, I did the math. South Africa in 1990, if you're using 2021 international dollars, our GDP per capita was about $10,000 a person. Poland was 13,000. By the 2024 round of data, it had gone up in Poland to about $40,000, while we've gone up to about 13,000. So the gap that's opened up between the two economies in that time period is absolutely huge. And Poland's got only 60% of the population that South Africa has. So the fact they've been able to achieve this in such a short period of time is quite remarkable. But yeah, we're just being set. I mean, you've been going on it for about it, which is great. Our standards are being set so low at the moment. The Treasury, I think, came out and they said they were hoping for 1.4% before this round of data was announced. So it's far below their expectations. And the truth is probably, I mean, we say that they're touching water in terms of the population growth. Considering we don't have any clue about what the illegal immigrant numbers are in the country, our population growth is probably actually a bit higher than the recorded amount. So actually, we're probably still getting poorer, even on this latest round of data, if we're being honest. And yeah, I mean, tying onto the Iran stuff as well. I mean, this is obviously going to escalate a lot of these problems in the next round of data coming out in terms of inflation rises. Our fuel reserves are, of course, quite low at the moment. A lot of it was sold off, over the last years too. As Rob mentioned, our refineries have shut down. I believe we've only got two, one in Durban, one in Cape Town, the Astron one in Cape Town, that's still in operation. And then we've got some of Sasol's coal to fuel processing plants too. But the one thing we could be making money out of, if we had planned ahead, of course, is all that traffic is now coming around the Cape of Good Hope that would have been going through the Suez Canal and past the Arabian Peninsula. A lot of that traffic's now coming around the Cape of Good Hope, but we can't make any money really off the port transferring costs because none of the ports work at the same time. So the one saving grace we have, we can't actually take advantage of.
Yeah, no, quite. I mean, I'll raise a small flag over here because this is something that I mentioned in the latest edition of Prism. Please go to the Cape Independence website, Cape Independent, thecapeinDependent.com, and purchase Prism because this is where we hide all of our big, fat, dense, insight articles behind a tiny little 50 Rand paywall per edition. So the last edition was on like economic elites and so on. And one of the big flagship projects of the elite in the last 5 to 7 years has been Operation Vulindlela. And the idea is that we're revamping all of the ports and rail and transport links and a whole bunch of other things. And so they've got their eyes on this. But you look at when they want to do something. So I can't remember if it was Pier 1 or Pier 2. Because they're called a number, so it's difficult for me to remember which one is which. It's not like they're called Ringo and George or whatever. But so one of the piers was sold off to a Philippine company, and there's big fanfare about the privatization and everything. And then you go and look at the details, and they sold 49% of it and let them manage it to some extent, but you still got the Public Investment Corporation sitting on the controlling shares and making sure that the cadres get their cut. So, like all things ANC related, there's just so much skullduggery. And I mean, one of the big things that structures all of this Operation Vulindlela stuff is something called the Resource Management Fund. So it's registered as an NPO, which means anyone employed under there, it's all tax deductible. And all the major corporations in South Africa, banking, consultancy industry, whatever, they've been dumping, sort of high paid employees into this vehicle that then gets deducted from tax, and they are then deployed into the civil service to run whole government departments for us, right? The problem with this is that, while on the one hand you think, okay, well, great, the private sector is so much more efficient, but on the other hand, these are all level 1 BEE companies, and the Banking Association of South Africa's president is an ANC member, a former MP. So, we're getting all of these kind of systems where the integration between the public and private sector right up at the top is just becoming sort of absurdly sort of dense and interwoven. And the likelihood of us fixing the ports or anything, it doesn't seem to be very high. I mean, one of the big things that I'd bring up here is that there's a whole legislative framework around and regulatory framework around public-private partnerships, which basically means that your profits are guaranteed. Like, unless you commit some kind of egregious criminal act as the private partner, you're well looked after. Any stranded assets that occurs as a result of regulatory changes, delays, anything by the government, you're covered. So there's like no skin in the game that'll actually force these people to really make things work. It's kind of worrisome. There doesn't seem to be any deep incentive, because it sort of feels like one of those Hail Mary passes. Because on the one hand, you're looking at sort of a very sophisticated thing that looks very state capture-y. But on the other hand, it's sort of one of those things where you go, yeah, of course, we desperately want to fix the country, but we also want to make sure that actually, if it all goes pear-shaped, it doesn't really cost us anything. And so it doesn't strike me as an enormously, because there's no risk in the investment, it strikes me as a potentially, it doesn't inspire confidence. So this is fairly concerning for a number of reasons, but I think one of the things to keep an eye on is just the amount of hedging of risk over here doesn't bode well. I don't know what you're seeing, Leo, but that kind of thing raises a lot of red flags. Oh shit!
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. Yeah, my bad. I spoke there too soon.
Hopefully we'll get Robert King back in a minute. I don't know what's happened to him. Maybe it's the storm passing overhead.
Yeah, the signal has been terrible today overall. Just like, oof. But in any case, like, I think part of it is I can almost sympathize with it. The fact that if you're going to make a massive capital investment, you need low risk. You need to be fairly certain that you're gonna get your money back. For a country like South Africa, well, the general rule of thumb is that you want to be making your money back in a couple of in South Africa. Maybe you'd expect to make your money back in about 8 years if you're making a major capital investment. If you're that's only really possible if you're certain that this capital investment is secure. And in South Africa, you have no real reason to believe that it's going to be a low risk investment, especially when you have a government that doesn't, or a state that doesn't provide security to your assets. You have, you don't know what's going to happen let's say if you own the port, for example. It's a sort of natural monopoly. There's a lot of security involved with having a port in general. That's pretty much impossible to work around. I don't think you can expect there to be competition with the ports themselves, but beyond that, you need the security.
You say that, but there are some interesting dimensions to this. So I was looking at, and this is old. This is like 15 years old, because there's not a lot written about port economics in Southern Africa. So, but I found a very interesting paper from, I think, 2011, 2012. And they were pointing out, and I'm pretty sure it's still the case, that you get a lot of traffic that's supposed to go to Maputo, right? But instead they send them to Durban, and you think, well, why are they doing that? Because Maputo's got a port that's run by the UAE, very efficient, very good container handling, and Durban has the least efficient port container handling in the world, the least, right at the bottom of the World Bank rankings. So you think, well, what are they doing? Well, it turns out that okay, we're stupid and incompetent in this country, but the civil service, as it turns out, does not take bribes of such grandiose character that you are incurring severe budgetary risk by putting your ship in the port. But in Maputo, while the ship handling is really good, I mean the container handling is really good. Your customs officials, you never know when they're going to shake you down or for how much. So, in order to avoid that kind of risk, they'll rather sort of sit in a 3-week queue to get into Durban, which I found that to be a very interesting thing. So the um, competition between ports seems to still be quite real. I mean, you've got a lot of people who are shipping their goods out through the Lebombo route instead of going down to Durban. You've got a lot of people sending up their goods to Walvis Bay instead of out through Cape Town. There are a few ports where there's no substitution, such as Saldanha. You can't really do much about that, and so the compensation strategy has been to create these unwieldy giant stockpiles of iron ore that sit there in Saldanha, in the hopes that it'll be enough if the line goes down or the train derails or whatever happens every couple of months. And I think with Operation Vulindlela, I think the mining sector is actually sort of breathing a slight sigh of relief that they're getting to reach into this process a little bit. And all of the other comments I made aside, on balance, I think just for that sector, it's probably a good thing, because I mean, crikey, if you start trying to if you pay attention to the trade magazines and the problems that they're dealing with on that line, it's depressing.
Yeah,
So,
I think anyone who has any stake when it comes to international trade at this point has had a very, very busy last 18 months or so. It only seems to get busier for them. So I have a lot of sympathy in that regard. But again, to the point of the port competition, I mean specifically the port's relation to the domestic economy. So Durban is there are going to be alternatives, but Durban is going to be carrying pretty much the entirety of the whole sort of greater Durban area. Nobody else can really be strongly competitive in that regard.
No, that's true, and they're developing that. They're trying to expand the dry port in Johannesburg to as a major logistics interchange, and there's also some weird little developments that are happening up in Katanga and Zambia, and I understand the long-term plan is to shunt some of those ore exports down south. Although at the moment some of them are going out, on the east coast, Tanzania and so forth. But I think, after all, I mean that the development of Katanga and the border with Zambia, that was, in my opinion, that was the main reason for us getting involved in DRC. It was part of it appears to be a quid pro quo that we lend them troops towards a very stupid and poorly thought out military operation, turning what was a peacekeeping operation into an offensive, what well, defensive really, but into a sort of conventional war, which went pear-shaped immediately because we suck. But Standard Bank pushed through their main flagship investment. I mean, for them, this is like the investment project, is that development of the mines in Katanga and the trade routes across there. So I think even if you exclude that, I mean, the development of that big dry port in Johannesburg is going to increase traffic to through Lebombo into Mozambique, and it's going to increase traffic through to Durban. I don't know how well they're going to handle that, but I mean, when you look at when you look at what the citrus farmers have been doing, because the cold storage units, our delays suck. I mean, it causes like destruction of goods, and so I think if you've got perishable goods like that, you're going to swallow those customs bribes in Maputo before you deal with any kind of delays at Durban. So it's trade-offs completely different with perishable and non-perishable goods. But yeah, it remains to be seen what the long-term developments are going to be. But I think they're going to continue in the same direction. I think we're still going to be looking at general decline here. Especially considering how they're developing that new corridor that's supposed to go through from Gaborone to out through to Walvisbaai. Because when that gets online, because Johannesburg to Gaborone is actually not that far. It's not that far, and the roads are not completely terrible. I mean, there's some of them are crap, but they're not completely washed away or anything. And so I think when that comes online, you're going to see a big shift. You're going to see a big shift. You're going to see a lot of non-perishable goods, eschewing the East Coast for the West Coast. Although it remains, I don't know what form that's going to be taking yet. We'll have to see. But yeah, I think South Africa is going to lose some of its dominance in the ports world at the moment, very shortly in a decade. That very shortly, I say, but 10 years is a long time in a human lifetime. Yeah.
I don't know if you covered it already, but it sounds like almost a repeat of 100 years ago, or over 100 years ago, when the Transvaal, weren't they going to move their output through Maputo, basically through Mozambique, to the international community, and that's why, well, that was one of the triggers for the Union of South Africa in the first place.
Yeah. It was that tariff dispute. It was like a three-way tariff dispute between the Cape, Natal, and Transvaal. Yeah, I mean, the Transvaal was getting irritable because at the time they were still in a sort of fairly loose confederation, and they thought, to hell with you guys raising your tariffs and competing with each other. We're just gonna go out through Maputo, and everyone goes, oh no, that's a bad idea. We can't. If the Transvaal breaks free, we're going to have another Boer War, and let's not do that again. So yeah, no, everyone sort of said, let's just put our nuts together, and I mean, as you pointed out, that odd, interesting little book, Natalians First, Leo. Yeah, if it wasn't for the Natalians pushing back, we might have had Smuts's dream of a perfect unitary state. Which
And the Eastern Capers, they were also there fighting.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's funny. It's funny that you always think of the Afrikaners as the hard-headed lot, but both of the secession movements that have occurred in the history of South Africa before now have been directed by English South Africans. Eastern Cape trying to get out of the Cape Colony in the 1880s or whatever it was. No, it was earlier. It was 1870s and so 1860s.
Yeah, it was very early.
Yeah. And then of course you got Natal in the early days of the Union. So I mean, it's funny. It's like once again, it's us salty bastards getting all itchy about present arrangements.
Oh well, listen, history always it finds a way to rhyme. So
yeah. Who is that? Speaking of which, Robert, you wanted to brief us on what's happening with Mr. Brent Bosel III, because it seems that South Africa is looking for a way to return the slap that America dealt us by kicking out our ambassador. What's it, a year ago? Well, not a year ago, but last year.
Yeah, so I mean, look, it wasn't as serious as look. What's happened is a démarche, I think is the name, which is basically a dressing down of the ambassador, telling him, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that. You're a naughty boy for saying that our courts are not beyond reproach," basically. So it isn't an expulsion, and it would be interesting to see if South Africa will ever take that approach. I mean, the fact that they've tried to make this statement in the first, I think, 3.5 weeks of him being here is a clear indication of the approach they're going to take to the relationship going forward. But yeah, his speech overall was quite interesting. So obviously, it took place last week at the BizNews conference in Hermanus. He was announced as the special guest, basically, I believe, on the Tuesday, on the first day of the conference. And there were two main parts that had been broadcasted to his speech. So there was the main speech he delivered, and then the Q&A afterwards. And it seems like the Q&A was where most of the trouble was. I actually found his main speech to be, a decent one. It wasn't one which was seeking to escalate the temperature, to use the term. He was talking about, the positive trade relationships that already exist between South Africa and the United States. He was highlighting how companies like Visa, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they're going to be investing over the next few years billions of rands into the local economy, and the development of things like data centers and other projects. And he
Yeah.
also announced at the conference a select USA investment accelerator to make it easier for South African companies to invest in the
Let me
US.
guess. Did he mention Westgrow at all as in the Western Cape in particular? Because I know that in 5 years ago that was the big thing, is America making these provincial level trade deals with Westgrow and the Western Cape. Did that feature at all?
I didn't see a reference to Westgrow. I don't think even he delivered
Mm.
a particular reference to the
Okay.
Western Cape in his speech, although Alec Hogg did bring up the Western Cape in the Q&A section. But yeah, I mean, look, the speech was largely quite a moderate one, I would say. I mean, he emphasized the America First messaging, but said, it doesn't mean America alone. They want to trade with South Africa. He even said, look, he understood the history of South Africa. I mean, he had made a visit to the apartheid museum, and he said he understood the need for redress. But you also
Yeah, I
cited
thought
that he,
I thought that whole bit was funny because when it was being covered in the news, like he was going down to the apartheid museum and everything, it didn't have the same tone as it usually has when Americans visit it, because when normal America when a normal American administration comes and does that, it feels like, yes, we are reaffirming the historical perspective, but it feels different when you've got a more belligerent guy like Trump in charge, because now it feels more like sort of out of curiosity, we're just going to look at what the other side is saying, and oh, I didn't realize that you guys had this going on. It had that weird tone to it, which I don't it, which I think was a bad look, really.
well, look,
He
look, I
probably
think
would have been better off just like not visiting those museums and just being there, because it kind of uh, I think his background and his administration throws such a contrast on the usual sort of what's the word for it, like genuflection, the ideological genuflection that you have to do, like, because he's doing the genuflection, but you're like, yes, but of this particular civic religion you are an atheist, so uh, it doesn't have the same tone to it.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, Bazel's had a history of being very critical of the ANC. So in the 1980s, he was ahead, I think it was Conservatives or Republicans against ANC terrorism. In 2013, after Mandela's death,
Yeah.
he was very critical of the mythology that had been established around Mandela. But at the same time, look, I mean, we're not diplomats. He's someone who is a diplomat. There's certain things you have to do as part of the game, so to speak. And I mean, he made it very clear in the Q&A section, which was a lot more interesting, I found, than the speech, because he seemed a bit more belligerent in the Q&A section. He made it quite clear that, look, he hadn't come to raise the temperature himself. He didn't want to pick a fight with the government. Maybe it's a case of a good cop, bad cop arrangement where Trump's been the bad cop and he's now coming over as the good cop, trying to sort things out, which doesn't seem to have worked,
Yeah.
considering the ANC seems to be very hostile towards him. But yeah, if we go into some of the details of the Q&A, where it was really interesting. Firstly, we've heard for a while now that there's been 4 specific asks of the South African government from the US. I think that came out last year when Corne Mulder and some of the other Afrikaner leaders went to the United States. They came back and said, look, in order to get an improvement of relationships, a trade deal with the US, there was a requirement for reforms to the expropriation without compensation bill. Farm murders had to be declared a priority crime. Kill the Boer had to be condemned by the government, and US businesses had to be exempt from black economic empowerment. Now, in his Q&A section, a fifth point has been added, which is that South Africa has to become non-aligned on foreign policy issues. So that was an interesting development. And then that discussion around Kill the Boer led to the point where all the problems emerged, which is he said that he believed it was hate speech, and that, I'm sorry, I don't care what your courts say, it's hate speech. And that's where, this, whole hysteria has been, rising out of. We know for a long time.
Yeah, he could
now
have
that
worded that better.
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with the statement, though. Actually, it's a
no. I mean, like
you
can. But what my point is basically he could have expressed exactly the same sentiment in a different tone by saying, I'm not sure I understand the court's judgment on this position because, from my perspective, it seems pretty common sense that this is an act. This is a hate speech. It's a call to violence and so on. And you just say, well, I'm not sure I understand why this decision was made. It is, but instead he goes like, well, I don't care about your courts, bugger them, which is
it's a flippant remark.
It is a flippant remark, but in context of how the Americans have been handling this, sure, they've made these demands, but the leverage to turn them into something real has just not materialized. I mean, I remember the deadline for the bits of legislation they were going to put into place to impose sanctions on the ANC leaders. That was introduced into they had to have a vote on that before the 3rd of January, and they didn't. And so it expired. So it doesn't seem like they're doing anything. And then AGOA comes up for review. And even though we actually graduated out of the economic categories that AGOA is made to, apply to, they just, when they just went along and included us anyway. So they didn't just not do it. They did us an active favor in that regard. So now I'm sort of looking at this and thinking, do the Americans actually care about their position on South Africa, or are they just, saying stuff idly? What's going on?
Well, remember, there's divergence between Congress and the executive as well. So those bills, and most bills that are presented in the US Congress, I think 99% of them don't seem to actually get anywhere because there's so much deadlock and delay, and you've got filibusters and you've got things blocking it like that. So, I mean, under the current Trump administration, there's very few notable bills that have actually been passed through Congress. And then on AGOA, I mean, what's happened there is there's been I think a year-long extension on that. So we'll see what happens after a year. But in the grand scheme of things, look, Bazell also made a point in his speech, and I think this is a very notable one. He declared that the Trump administration believes South Africa to be a top 10 foreign policy issue. So, yeah, but I guess the point, rises that there's only so much you can. I mean, we knew this from the CIG's experience in the United States. There's only so much you can do as the external power in that regard. You need your domestic actors on the scene to actually do more themselves. Be a bit more aggressive themselves in some ways. And then they've made it quite clear. I mean, in the interactions we had last year, that there were many people there that would be quite keen to support. But yeah, I mean, Rob, I mean, what would your ideal Trump administration do in terms of South Africa from your perspective?
Well, they would have just followed through on what they said. I mean, it's not like the moves they chose are particularly extreme.
But specifically, what?
So I mean, like sorry, hold on. I'm being visited by a very needy German Shepherd. So Zaira, out, please. Thank you. Very obedient, very nice. What was I going to say? Oh yes, Trump, America, sanctions, etc. So, So I mean, I contributed some of the research at the time. I don't know if the main decision makers actually read it because it was at that transition period when Adam Stritz was on his way out, and he was the one who commissioned the research for me and so on. But so I did have an eye on the process, how they were negotiating this. And what Solidarity and AfriForum are doing is they're saying, listen, don't hurt our exports to your country. We want the trade. We need the trade. So please just don't touch that. If you're going to do sanctions, target the ANC leadership. And they actually drew up policies. They drew up legislation. And they have control of all three branches of the government. They can push it through if they get the party whip in line. And all they had to do is target the few top ANC cadres and cripple them. And I think part of the problem with this is that a lot of these guys are, close business partners of companies that have very deep financial ties to the United States. And so part of me wonders, well, not just the United States, but also Great Britain. And I do wonder if there wasn't sort of someone behind closed doors sort of going, yeah, guys, actually, but I'm going to lose a few million if you do that. So don't do that. Um, and yeah, but if they follow through on this, it's like it's not going to necessarily directly cripple South Africa's trade. It'll just, hurt a few people at the top. It will have an effect on the economy, given how integrated the economic elite are with the state and so on. So, it remains to be seen what that would look like. But actually having the lever in place to say, yeah, we're going to do this, given how fragile the country's fiscal status is, this would have meant something. But you know, we're not even doing diplomatic sanctions against South Africa. What we're doing is we're talking big and then doing nothing. And what that's doing, I think, with this situation with Bazal is it's I never know if he's Bozel or Bazal, but Bozel sounds too much like the name of a Muppet. So let's go to Bazal. The the sorry, um, but the thing over here is that you're getting increasingly belligerent responses from Pretoria. So they're just they're saying like, okay, well, you're not for real. We can do as we please. And I think also, when Bazal says, "Oh, top 10 priority for America," but what are the other things in the top 10? It's like Iran, Venezuela, Ukraine, Taiwan, chip shortage, uh, you know, de-dollarization, Panama Canal, right? I mean, they're busy having proxy wars in Thailand and Cambodia. They had a US backed regime change in Nepal. I mean, like the kind of things that America's busy with right now, and then you look at South Africa, who's just a bit of like a mild pain in the bum. It's like, do you really think they'll ever get round to us before Donald Trump is booted? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, look, I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, we've only had a US ambassador for the last 3 weeks, so that's often a big part of developing your policies is having an ambassador in place. It's sort of been in limbo for a while because you've got the civil service that's basically been running the embassy over here. But I mean, look, on the things that the administration actually stated that they're going to do, and I think we must be careful conflating, for example, statements made by a specific member of Congress with statements that the US government made. Now, as far as I know, the US government actually didn't come out and say that they're going to do specific sanctions against government officials. I mean, they did obviously say that they're going to use tariffs as a point of leverage, which they've used. Obviously that's in state of limbo at the moment because of the Supreme Court ruling, but there are mechanisms to reinstate them. Obviously, the refugee scheme that they put in place, they have followed through on. Apparently, more than 1,000 Afrikaners have left. I think the big problem there is just not many people have taken it up here because it's not really great being a refugee at the end of the day. So we've seen on a number of these issues, and then of course, and then you can say maybe some things are a bit more performative, like kicking South Africa out of the G20 and replacing them with Poland. But I mean, on some of these points, they did follow through on it. Now we'll have to see what happens over the next year or so, because we've got an ambassador in place. Um, we'll have to see what the discussions coming actually out of South Africa from specifically in our space are. But there are a lot of opportunities there. And I think a lot of it comes down to the groups inside South Africa making a clear statement to the United States on what they would like to see, actually.
Okay, well, fair enough. There's still room to maneuver. I just, you know me. I've always a more pessimistic sort of view on things. So my sort of gauge is doesn't look like the Americans are doing anything. Doesn't look like Pretoria is budging on any of their key issues, from Israel to Iran. I mean, they showed the finger on Iran, which shows that they're either very stupid or not scared. And I mean, the thing is, you can say the ANC are very stupid, but the thing is, when you're at the top of a state, it's very uncommon. It's very uncommon for you to not have some kind of awareness of the international balance of forces, and it's only really in a crisis that you see people that you see people taking big gambles, or if they're completely inexperienced. And I don't think South Africa's in either position. So it strikes me as unlikely that Ramaphosa is taking the stances that he is in a vacuum. I think the fact that they're being belligerent is a sign that America isn't going to do anything. And I mean, that little sort of media kerfuffle about the refugees returning, which was based on a bunch of spook awesome, where they basically just interviewed a couple of random South Africans who returned from America to South Africa, moved into the safe suburban areas and got employed in major BEE listed corporations, and said, well, oh, okay, well, everything's fine then. And then claimed, based on absolutely nothing but a few stray opinions and remarks, that all of the refugees are coming back because they're disappointed. That was very fun. That was very strange to me because it was punted on on AP. It was punted on Reuters. It was punted in Al Jazeera. So it seems that someone wants to try and undermine it, and someone very high in the international sort of hierarchy is starting to go, yeah, no, we're done supporting the Trump train now. The pushback begins. And
Well,
I
I
think
don't think
that's
the
got to do
Afrikaner
with
scheme was
his.
the Afrikaner scheme was never popular with the mainstream media on this point at any point in
Yeah,
the
no, it's a bit
discourse.
clownish, but this is the sort of move that you make when you have confidence people will believe the lie, so to speak. And I think that that's coming out because it's a different level of confidence and strategy in PR, and you shift to those when you've got a bit of momentum. So I suspect that this is part of the blowback for the Iran war, because it does seem like America is mismanaging this a bit. Their communications on why they got involved at various stages have been confused and contradictory, and it hasn't looked very professional. And they've been sort of caught flat-footed with the Iranian response, which has been to attack, all of the neighboring states that host the American military in some capacity. And I mean, that's a big thing, because your question then becomes, well, what good is the American alliance, because they can't protect us? So what are we doing here? Um, and look, America's big and powerful; they can do a lot of things, but unless they're going to take out Iran's entire government in the next week or two, it strikes me as highly unlikely that the appreciation of this war is going to change. I think it's going to remain, especially because his base voted for him on the basis of we're not going to have any more foreign wars. So I think this isn't this is a big momentum loss for Trump.
Well, we'll see
In
what
a lot of
happens. I
ways.
mean, look, the last poll that came out, I think, was 85% of the Republican base, supports Trump's foreign policy position, and 5% supported Tucker Carlson's. So, I mean, the base is. I mean, look, I think certain things like X can amplify certain voices on this issue, but at the moment, at least, the base is still very much behind him on that issue. But I think we can risk conflating the Afrikaner issue too much with the Iran one. I think there's a risk of doing that. I mean, look, we've seen, since the beginning of the Afrikaner refugee scheme, we've seen, counter signaling against the Afrikaner refugee scheme the entire time. There were stories about these people being car guards from South Africa going to America to try and find work. We heard stories when they arrived that they were having a terrible time. So this is just, I don't see this as being anything particularly special. It just seems to be a continuation of what we've seen since the beginning of last year.
Yeah, I think the South African media are generally pretty eager to jump on any anti-American sentiment. So, I mean, the story was complete nonsense for the most part. I think Conscious Caracal did his own good breakdown of why it was nonsense on the Rational Standard. It's just it also feels like it feels like the same story I hear every 6 months or so, right? This is not it doesn't this comes in waves as far as I can tell. It's doesn't feel novel.
Okay. No, I don't know. I think we'll see how it turns out in the midterms, because one of the things that I notice I've sort of picked up on over the past few years is that we talk about the disconnect between Twitter and the real world, but I think that's generally a question of timing, because guys are obsessed with politics on Twitter and YouTube or whatever sort of social media outlet. The commentariat, the people who are there to make sense of the world, because they've got their eyes on the problem really intently, they will shift their opinions before the rest of the public do. And so my impression, by looking at how much of the commentariat have been shifting their perspective on Trump recently, is that down the line, as those opinions and analysis flow out, we should start seeing a shift. And I do sort of think that because it's fairly comprehensive, there are very few holdouts that say, yeah, this is great. Trump's fulfilling his mandate and everything by doing what he's doing. There are a lot of voices who kind of who have been very hardcore sort of Trump supporters since going back to 2015, who are now kind of going, yeah, no, total betrayal, blah blah blah. Various angles they're taking on this, but I mean, there's this weird sort of like center ground that's starting to assemble between, like right wing figures, even the crazies like Milo Yiannopoulos and what have you, all the way over to the left wing, where you're getting people like Novara Media or what are those buggers called, the Young Turks or whatever. You know who I'm talking about? That sort of chunk of the left. They're sort of forming like this very, very common perspective on American and Israeli foreign policy that seems to be, how should I put it? They seem to be not getting a lot of well thought out critiques back, and that not and I think that unless they face a much more coherent challenge or some new development occurs, they may very well carry the narrative over the next 6 months or so. But this is all speculation. So for now, as you point out, the plebs are in agreement with the emperor, and so it's fine for now.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it goes on with the war. I mean, if it does go on for a few months, and like with most foreign interventions, it ends up hammering the incumbent. I mean, in general, midterm elections over the last the foreseeable past, basically the last 20 years, have been bad for the incumbent president. I guess it's often just a scale of what kind of loss it is, and certainly in the House of Representatives, because they've had such a slim majority up until now, it's very likely they'll lose the House. A little bit less likely what's going to happen in the Senate. I think the betting markets there have it on about 50-50 at the moment. And yeah, we'll just have to see how the war progresses. I would say on a lot of these points, there has been a lot of hysteria over the last 18 months with talk of betrayal, and then things end up going in the opposite direction. Basically, I think there was a lot of hysteria around the tariffs, which, you know, they may have not been the most perfect thing in the world, but they haven't been the utter catastrophe as they were predicted at the time. At the same time, so we'll just have to see how it unfolds over the next few weeks. So you know, it's. I mean, we can focus on, obviously it's not great for America at the moment. You know, they haven't deposed the regime after 3 weeks. But at the same time, it's not great for Iran either at the moment. You know, they're not finding themselves in the most perfect, positions, and most of their leadership is dead.
No, it's true. It's true. I wanted to sort of wind up on the international sort of stuff now, because I mean, obviously you guys have to go, but I just wanted to briefly mention a few things coming up. So the DA has now been selecting its candidates for the local government election, as many parties have been doing. ANC's in disarray. They're having to restructure the entire Western Cape branch because they've been losing major sort of players to the DA. Guys like Banele Majingo, who's walks into the DA saying, but I will continue with the struggle, and there's nothing different, nothing I have to do different. And Jordan Hill Lewis has been trying to pitch some very interesting sort of standpoints. We're saying, no. You've got there's no left or right anymore. We're the party of the center and the status quo, and just making sure that just making sure that whatever's already on paper is more thoroughly, rigorously, and forcefully implemented. And the the problem with his massive recruitment of ANC and EFF cadres into the Cape branch of the DA is that I think, look, it's aiming to sort of capture those patronage networks and accelerate the process of ANCification, in the hopes that what it'll do is shore up the black vote for the DA in the coming elections. Now, this is a tricky point, because the DA hasn't been able to capture more than 4% of the black vote anywhere outside of Gauteng and so far. But I think it's actually an empirical question whether this new strategy will work, because in the past there has been one example of a successful white DA candidate winning a fully black ward, and that is a woman called, I can't remember if her first name is Annalena or Annette, but her surname is Grobler. And she she won a by-election in 2014 on the back of allegations that she was selling plots to land invaders for 500 rand a pop. Now, that raised a few flags for me, because what the DA has been doing, especially in Hermanus, the mayor over there in Overstrand, has been extremely cozy with the Land Party. And when the Land Party want to do a new land invasion, he immediately strikes an MOU to sort of validate the land invasion. And in ward council meetings, he has celebrated the white communist agitator that gave birth to the party, something, what's her name, Vanessa Swanepoel. So he has celebrated her and said how much he loves her, perhaps too much, things like that. And so there's this extremely tight relationship that the DA has been trying to form with the Land Party, which they can't do in public because it would make them look atrocious and lose them their white base, which, as we all know, votes somewhere between 1 and 2/3 and twice the rate of the non-white population. So yeah, there's problems there, and some of the corruption is and rigging of ward council selection, fairly blatant as well, has been coming to light, and intimidation of public participation processes. I think the problem is that the DA is skating on thin ice at the moment, and they're taking actually a very risky pivot strategy. And in the middle of this, as they're selecting their candidates, there's a major crisis that's about to hit Stellenbosch. Now, I'm going to be able to do a more thorough article on this after Monday, because I'll be getting some sources and so on. But my understanding of the current relationship is, look, since 2018, they've had a fully captured municipality. The mayor at the time, Geesie van Deventer, in collusion with Geraldine Mettler, who's the current municipal manager. Their ties go back many years from before either of them were in Stellenbosch admin. And then the former head of HR, or was it corporate services? I can't remember, Annelien de Beer. They basically worked together to seal off the civil service of that municipality from any council oversight. So you can't get any information or any meetings with any staff without the permission of one of those three people. And so after she was removed for there was a lot of accusations of hiring practice or whatever, but the problems were much deeper. She was removed a couple of years ago and replaced with a bus driver called Jeremy Fussert, who, by all accounts, regularly meets with her for the consensus understanding from people I speak to.
Wow, I guess we'll never hear what happened with with her and the bus driver.
You'll have to wait till Monday.
Yes, very exclusive story that will come out on Monday then.
This is
Rob,
all intentional. It's to leave you on a cliffhanger.
Leave it on the cliff. Oh, they got him. they got him.
Yeah.
They heard him start rattling off the story, and they just took his connection out like that. Okay, well, I think I'll wait for Rob to return here, but I think Rob, you need to probably head off now.
Yes. So yeah, you can talk more about the economic data. I saw in the comments a lot of people seem to be big fans of the economic data.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really, nothing quite captures the sort of raw animal magnetism of a quarterly GDP report. There's very few things that are as attractive.
I think we need a regular commentary on the Cape Independent website where you can break it down for everyone. I think it will be very popular.
Yes, I probably should do a quick rundown of this. The problem is that the regional reports, they just don't produce them frequently. So the data is all national. I want more, Cape specific data. I don't know. They don't. Stats SA has gone downhill so much over the years, but.
Okay, it looks like we got Rob back. Well, one Rob joins us, one Rob will leave us.
Beg your pardon for that.
Yes.
Just to finish the thought here. So here's your fun dear.
Sorry, Rob. I've just got to head off.
All right. Well, Robert, if you need to head off, goodbye and good luck. And I'll wind up this little saga without you.
Okay.
We'll sleep well, etc. All right. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers, Rob.
Well, so here's the crux of the matter. So there are two major sort of systemic problems that are coming to a head here, because since 2018, since they sealed off the civil service and captured it, there's been a number of little corruption scandals, little and large. But one of the ones that has come to light is that, so Section 14 of the Municipal Financial Management Act means that if you want to rent out government property, or you want to change the title deed specifications, or you want to sell the land or whatever, there has to be an open bidding process. And they stopped doing that almost completely in 2018. And they got a legal opinion a few years ago, one from the Treasury and one from Waxman's attorneys. And these said, okay, well, actually, all of your property transactions are ultra vires. So Stellenbosch has now got a problem where every single property transaction the municipality has done since 2018 is now subject to legal challenge, whether by the person who purchased or rented or whatever, or by literally anyone else who might want to purchase or rent the land. So this is a huge problem that unwinding all of this is likely going to bankrupt the municipality several times over. It's like catastrophic. It's a kind of financial problem that you would expect from somewhere in Limpopo. And the other, no, I'm not even joking. And the other aspect of it is, in order to protect this sort of legal lacuna that they created for themselves to do as they pleased, these characters began firing anyone who was halfway competent or intelligent anywhere in the municipality. And so there's like these sort of creeping general systems failures, the most prominent of which is the water systems. Now, I've reported fairly extensively on this, and this started to come to light because of Annelien de Beer's replacement, or acting replacement, Anton Kannemeyer. Now, interestingly enough, he was given this acting role to replace her while not letting go of his other role, which was HR. And that these two roles are, they have different categories, so you can't outright fire someone below this managerial, the top managerial layer from the council. You're prevented from doing that, so they can't get rid of him. And what he's been doing, according to former employees, is he deliberately he was according to the sources I had, he was fraudulently reworking what are they called, where you request equipment, the forms for requesting equipment. So he would rework them and change them to make them so that they had to be denied, and he made them run circles so that their jobs were impossible. Harassed them, insulted them, blocked.
Would this apply to the
did.
municipal fire station? Just by out of curiosity.
See, no, I haven't dug into. There are too many features. I mean, there are too many features for me to look into. But I will have a look at this. Why do you bring the fire station up?
Well, I woke up. It's funny. A couple of years back, my driving instructor was also a volunteer firefighter for the fire station, and he told me that you would request, the fire station would request equipment, especially vehicles, and it would just never happen. The vehicles that they had there were from like the 90s.
No, but that's actually a broad problem in the Western Cape, because the ones sort of, they're not really supposed to do this, but they have to because they don't ever prepare for fire season. Is that the one fleet that's actually well equipped is Cape Town, and so what they end up having to do is share the vehicles and equipment across different district municipalities, and as far as I'm aware, the fire service actually handled the district level, so it's a Winelands municipality thing rather than a Stellenbosch municipality thing. So yeah, that might be a different issue. Stellenbosch local municipality, different. No one ever thinks about the district municipalities because they've got very few responsibilities and they hide people in them that they want to sort of, like, for example, Jeremy Fassa is going to be kicked to the curb. He's a bus driver. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's completely useless, and he's captured by Geesie van Deventer. But there's a replacement in the works. So there's this guy, I'm going to bring up my little wee notes here, a guy called Rudy Bass. So Rudy Bass is being pipped as the potential sort of replacement for Fassa if Fassa goes down. And what's interesting about Rudy Bass is that he is an old boy connection to both the other alternative prospect that was potentially going to be picked instead of Fassa, Jan de Villiers, and to the caucus leader Leon Schreiber.
So it's a helpful connection to have.
Interesting, yeah. So they're all old boys. They're part of an old boy network, and I mean, he's a left-leaning academic who thinks there should be a TRC for the Volchenhof residents at Stellenbosch University. The guy's out of his tree. But the thing is, he was hidden away in the Winelands district municipality, and then so this is keep him parked over there. The interesting thing is that apparently Geesie is fairly sort of friendly with this little crowd, which would explain why she's still on the committee that picks the ward councillors, right? So she's part of the committee that selects who the candidates are going to be for the upcoming election. So nobody can actually finger her for interference in the municipal process. because not only is she well connected with the hierarchy, she is also has enough power to decide whether or not you get to stand next election. So this is a very big problem. And when I was talking about the harassment of technical staff, one of the things that happened over there was that they pushed out all of the water engineers, every last one of them. So all of the water system specialists have been removed. And what that has meant is that one of the two water systems that feeds Stellenbosch, so there's a southern one that comes from Cape Town, and there's a northern one that comes from Idisvallei. And Idisvallei has not been maintained, and no one has any sort of measurement equipment running over there, so they don't know how full the dam is. And it's bone dry this season, right? So now they've been having to have these emergency water restrictions placed and all kinds of stuff while posting photos that are 5 years old of the dam overflowing during wet season. And like saying there's absolutely nothing wrong, addressing none of the content of any of my articles. Stellenbosch is going to implode. Stellenbosch is going to be an absolute fireworks show. But they're going to try and cover their asses for the next couple of months until the election happens. Because when it does blow up in their faces, it's going to be spectacular. It's going to be a complete meltdown. And it's on Leon Schreiber's watch because he knows about all of the corruption happening in that municipality. And he has no interest in doing anything about it. The same goes for Anton Bredell. Same goes for Helen Ziller. Same goes for Alan Windy. In every single example of corruption in the Western Cape that I've ever looked in, all of these characters have known about every single one of them. Okay, not Leon Schreiber. He's not actually looped into anything outside of his little ambit. But Bredell, Windy, and Ziller almost always are looped in to some email chain where they're like, yeah, we got a crisis over here. We can't let this get out, blah, blah, blah. Or we have a crisis here. Please help us out. Please get rid of these people. And the thing is, no one is ever held accountable. It's extraordinary. Until the police arrest someone, no one is held accountable. Like you get sort of pushed sideways or even promoted in response to criminal activity. So I mean, if you don't actually purge your party of criminal elements, you select for loyalty, great, but you're also selecting for incompetence, and so you're seeing this general decline in quality of governance in a lot of areas. And not everyone has the depth of capital that Cape Town has to sort of compensate for this. And the funny thing is, how do you actually purge disloyal elements in an authoritarian regime, for example? What's the leading way? Well, you do an anti-corruption drive. So it strikes me as extremely bizarre that they're missing out on a stone that can kill two birds and insisting on whining about the problem instead and just sort of preserving it in place. It seems like an absolute sort of like an extremely deep miscalculation. Very silly. Very silly.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes difficult to understand from the outside. So I speak with general speculation here, but from my experience, the type of people who enter into the sort of formal electoral politics and then try work their way up through party structures, it's there's this issue where your competence or lack thereof would get compensated usually to a much higher degree in the private sector, unless you had literally no competence, right? Literally no skills to offer to a private firm, and the necessity to keep your position and rise through the ranks of the party of the provincial system. It becomes sort of life or death. And I think even though we think from the top down there's a lot of influence, I think people are willing to fight a hell of a lot from the bottom up if you're careful with how you approach these issues.
Yeah, I mean, because also when you look at the top selection, the way that the DA selects their top members, they always talk about this 11-step process for weeding out the incompetent and corrupt people, but what it really is that you've got several optional steps. So you've got like a filter that says, okay, well, you're educated and you've shown that you imbibe the ideology and everything. Yeah. And then after that step, okay, you're, a whole bunch of bullshit that doesn't really matter and is completely optional. And then finally, the chair of the exco says, yeah, I like you, I don't like you. I like you, I don't like you. And then that selects the council, and then the council selects the exco. So it's very tight. It actually makes me think a lot of the way that the Soviet Union's party structure worked. It's a very sort of tight, self-referential committee system. As opposed to the sort of confederate system that you find in the Democratic Party in the United States, where you have to build from all of these different factions, or the sort of open plan, highly centralized system that the Republican Party has, or which allows you to have a circulation of elites and allows you to have a very central plan. So the Republican Party can change very rapidly from one cycle to the other. The Democratic Party is always the Democratic Party and always has all of these warring factions they have to juggle, which is why their platform is full of insane stuff all the time, but somehow never seems to shift very hard. The DA here, I think, they seem a lot to me like an old Soviet party, because you've got these rigorous ideological tests and exams that you have to follow, and then you've got groomed members that are picked by the the presidium. It's like you don't have you don't. I mean, like the ANC has now become more democratic in its structure than the DA. Especially after the reforms that Ramaphosa has put through, which, I mean, that remains to be seen what it's going to do, because Ramaphosa got into place because the party was undemocratic and you had these super delegates that controlled huge block votes. So you only had to bribe a certain selection of targeted, high-ranking and influential branch members. Whereas now it's much more open. So whether or not the oligarchs are going to be able to get their favored candidate, Patrice Motsepe, to get through all of these stages, there's a reason that they're going about it softly, instead of just trumpeting him from the hilltops. It's because they actually have to build legitimacy in a very old-fashioned way in order to actually get him up the ladder and get him to a point where he can challenge incumbents. And I think the resentment from a lot of the rank and file from being foisted with white monopoly capital's favorite candidate. I don't know how that'll turn out, and I don't think they do either. It's actually an open question. Whereas with the DA, 10 years in advance who the next leader is going to be.
Yeah, well, the ANC is just a totally. The problem is the ANC is a I mean, if you want to make the maybe a slightly unfair comparison, the DA is a machine, the ANC is a living thing, right? You can't really control it from the top down. I mean, you look at KZN, for example. If you try to enforce a top-down approach there, they're just going to kill you. Like there's not actually much. There's not much.
In a way, in a way, actually, it makes more sense to have the ANC split into 2 or 3 different parties, because then your competition is. The main competitive factions are siloed, and it reduces the ambiguity that creates the violent competition. So, ANC and MK, if they decide for a reunion coalition in 2029, which is not impossible, it could happen. They've got really, really great ways of just divvying up territory that won't get lost in the shuffle. Who's in charge of what. You go, okay. And the same for the EFF if they even get invited to the party. Who knows? They've outlived their usefulness now. So no one's
and
going to. Who's gonna
their
back
polling
them?
numbers keep declining as well. If we're going off for the
Well, exactly.
Social Research Foundation latest.
Yeah, I mean, look. Here's the thing. I remember, you and I both know that famous interview Zilla did for Chatham House back in 2012,
Yeah.
where before the EFF was formed, she was talking about the importance of having Julius Malema form his own party and divide the ANC's vote down, and provide like a radical bulwark that the DA could use as a bogeyman to sort of triangulate a coalition of Jacob Zuma's ANC. This was the idea, right? And the obviously, nothing went to plan, and it took longer, and they had to wait for Zuma to, trip out and whatever. But I noticed in 2015, Julius Malema had this 9 million, nearly 10 million tax debt to SARS, and the only person we know of on paper who actually helped him take care of this was Mazzotti, the tobacco smuggler. And he only gave him £1 million. Where did the other 8 million come from? Nobody knows.
Was Johan Rupert funding the EFF directly, or the EFF or Malema specifically? Because I know they had a sort of in the backrooms relationship.
It's certainly a possibility. He's a candidate. Nati Kirsch is a candidate. But I mean, I think the thing is that we all understood that. Once you sort of see the sort of plan being pitched to the high seat of the Fabian Society, then you sort of go, okay, well then people are taking this seriously, and they did meet. They had like Santa and Robin Renwick and a couple of heavyweights like this go and meet Julius Malema in London in 2015. So I think what happened is that they bailed him out and made sure that he was effective and scary for a number of years, and now he's not useful anymore. So he's on his own, and he's not getting the support that he needs to run the party, and it's deflating. Hence all of the defection. You had an entire branch, I think 33 people defecting from the EFF to the DA in Cape Town a couple of months ago. So what we're looking at over here is, the money is just being drained because the entire system is no longer worth it. But I think this is a problem coming because the DA can't represent the bulk of South Africa. And there's already a prevalent problem amongst black elites and black activists of all ages, where they look at the South African system and they think that even under the ANC, it is, as they put it, anti-black. So how do you think that narrative will translate when the DA is running an increased portion of it? It's really, really dangerous, because as far as I can understand from looking at some of the problems that the DA is starting to develop, even without having penetration of ANC cadres in there, very severe existential questions for municipal budgets. I mean, look, the guys that they've been putting in charge of these various departments, I mean, Schreier, they're not even running their department. Real resource management fund that's coming in and deploying private sector actors over there. So, I think there's a very, very strong risk the DA will not be able to change anything and will become the prime bogeyman for a general public who feel they have no legitimate political representation. At which point you start having to put out fires from people who are seeking power outside of the legitimate system. So this is deeply, deeply destabilizing, and the DA's ambitions are very, very dangerous. It is actually, in a funny sort of way, I think it's actually more stable to allow black nationalists to have control of the state than it is to let white liberals do it. It's very, very bad, because everybody knows this is a situation not to be trusted, and any cock up, any failure to deliver will be pinned on white monopoly capital. It's like it would be like if you decided in the middle of the Weimar constitutional crisis that you wanted to put like a 50% Jewish party in charge of Germany. It's like you're playing with fire, my friend. So
well, perhaps that's why
the
the vision seems to be an ANC DA coalition to sort of provide that legitimacy if the ANC remains a senior partner.
Yeah, but here's the problem: the ANC are declining too fast, and the DA are getting too excited about it. They're looking at, we're going to be the senior candidate next election, which is actually possible, not through any success of the DA. The DA could stay the same in terms of absolute voter value, because their voting turnout is declining, but slowly. The ANC's voter turnout is declining rapidly. And it's general voter turnout that's declining rapidly. And it's getting to the point that we are going to risk entering voter turnout territory that is globally unprecedented. I think if it continues on the current trend, we're going to have globally unprecedented low turnout in the middle of the next decade. That is, more than 2/3 of the voting age population boycotting the entire political process. This is like the kind of thing that you see in countries in the middle of a civil war. And we're going to be hitting it at the same time as a fiscal crisis. We're going to be hitting it at the same time as, public wealth, sort of general private wealth crisis, all kinds of systemic issues. I think this sort of weird omni crisis that we're heading towards, there doesn't seem to be any clear solution to it. I mean, aside from the stuff that I'm punting, which no one's buying quite yet, which is very frustrating. But I think, I think the DA are playing with fire, and I think unless people give them a reality check, I don't think the DA is going. Even in the best case scenario, in my opinion, I don't think the DA is ever going to go away. But if we can't give them a reality check in this local government election, and they have to realize that it can't be changed with just cosmetic features. They have to actually have systemic reform. They have to have a complete pivot in their policy position. They have to realize that what they're doing is not viable. They're still trying to push Tony Blair on Black South Africa, which is the most bananas sort of thinking I've ever fucking seen. Excuse my language. So I think they need to catch a wake up. Or else we're going to be in deep trouble, regardless of whether Cape Independence happens or not. The DA need to pivot hard, and the only way to do it is to vote for AIDS Front at the moment. Maybe ACDP, because I like them. They've got some good people, nice and cuddly.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting that when considering that, we sort of think of these parties almost not as the sort of bundle of policies that they advocate for, and you wonder, just would it even make a difference if they did pivot on their electoral prospects? I don't know if I just cut out there. You sort of froze on my end, but we look all around the world now, and you're seeing politics get driven by strong personalities for the most part. People who sort of point to the issues that sometimes don't get pointed to before and say, I care about this. I'm a strong person who's going to really, take my head and just hammer it into the wall if it gets anything done on this issue. And South Africa still has, unbelievably, a massive gap in that sort of politics. You have some people who have strong personalities, like Zuma and Malema, but because they are sort of very siloed in the people who they could appeal to, it's just, and also because, frankly, they're terrible, and their solutions to those problems would be terrible. But like, if you look at Gayton McKenzie or to some extent Herman Mashaba, there's strong personality, big issues, especially around illegal immigration, but because they're just so unserious of people, I don't know whether maybe that's just the issues. There's sort of a natural conflict between those two methods. But
well, the thing is that you need someone who's willing to have a bit of emotional distance from the stuff that they're saying in public. So those two figures that you brought up are very interesting to me, because Haman Mashaba has no air gap between the emotions that he expresses in public and the things that he feels and believes in private and as a professional. So his entire party is like governed by his limbic system. That's the recipe for disaster. And the on the other side, you've got Gayton McKenzie, who he's got that air gap is functioning just pashash, but what he's doing behind closed doors is, gimme, what do you got? Give it to me.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's this complete moral vacuum, and so I think, and everyone can see it. I think anyone who thinks that Gayton McKenzie is like a serious political reformer who believes in some kind of tangible vision is I don't know how you can really believe that, looking at his behavior, because you've had examples of him in government and it's been terrible. Everything he touches turns to shit. So I think that actually his limits to growth are defined by this, because he picks fights in the underworld which make it difficult for him to campaign in the city. So he's limited to the hinterland districts, so in the Cape. And he also blotted his copybook in the Karoo. So small district that I suppose many people feel they can ignore, but it's a track record, and people remember things like this, right? So look, his growth is, I think, limited to the 10 to 12% of colored voters. Oh, that's not 10 to 12% of colored voters. That's like a third of colored voters who like colored identity politics. But I don't think he can grow much more than that. I've seen the by-elections, right? People are very want to like turn him into a boogeyman, but it's not real. His vote share amongst the black population it's not completely negligible, but it's not big. And his vote share amongst the colored population only gets significant when the Good Party and then the localist parties like PBI or Cedarburg or First or whatever the hell they're called, because there's a lot of these little parties in various districts, right? When those mainly brown parties sort of take a bow and say, yeah, we're not contesting this by-election, then you get massive PA numbers. When they are contesting, the PA sort of does okay, not bad, sometimes impressive, but never a slam dunk.
Well, it appears that this time it was Gayton McKenzie who has taken out Rob. Unfortunately, the internet service has been pretty terrible. Well, I guess to sort of continue with what I was saying earlier. What Rob is saying is obviously absolutely true, but I think that's almost like a more personal limitation. I'm sort of imagining that the DA, even with its growth, or the ANC in its state of decline, are both sort of leaving a lot of energy and a lot of potential votes, not necessarily flipping votes, but maybe just getting people out to vote on the table. And they're not really fully capitalizing on the people who they should be capitalizing on. And, maybe in the case of the DA, this is less of an issue because the people who would vote DA are just going to be much more likely to vote DA in any case. But certainly for the ANC, I do feel that weak doesn't really begin to describe Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency, but the lack of energy, the unenthusiasm. It's like, if you've ever seen somebody do a job where they clearly don't want to be there, that's sort of what the last couple of years of Cyril in office has been. And I just feel like you need a much stronger personality to lead a party like the ANC, which is I think clearly hurting them in electorally.
This is true. Apologies for my terrible connection. It seems to the Wi-Fi seems to do this thing where signal's fine, and then all of a sudden, blip, goodbye, and then I have to reset. Sorry. Yeah. My sort of final comment on this is on politics and personality in South Africa is actually from Arthur Keppel Jones. He's remarking about this in the 1940s. And he says something that's still true today. It's like everything is dominated by these big personalities. And now when you look at the present day, it doesn't matter whether it's the black or the white community, whatever. Everyone's clinging on to personalities. And
yeah.
now it's not a uniquely South African thing, but I think that we don't have we how should I put this? We aren't interested in policy. We don't actually talk about or think about policy at all in this country. Like, there's a tiny group of people who pretend to care about it for 5 minutes, and then we move on. Like, policy is something that you only need internally. You don't need it for public appeal because no one thinks about it. It's like the UK. It's like, your 3-cent titanium tax is very important to debate. But in South Africa, no one cares whether it's a 3-cent tax on titanium or underwear or bananas or eyeglasses, so long as my guy's doing it and not your guy. And this is a big problem that we have, because it means that people are completely vulnerable to any form of political manipulation, as long as the person they trust is pushing the reform. And there are limits. But the limit is, am I going to be made penniless and homeless? Which is an extraordinarily terrible, like low threshold. And, John Steenhuisen is such a terrible, worthless individual that he managed to do that to the farming community. He managed to trigger that sort of threshold for them. Like, oh, right, we're going to be completely bankrupted and cast out by these, if these policies, take their toll. So, and I do wonder if Stellenbosch is going to be taken to that brink. So, it remains to be seen. They could weather this, but when the property situation gets evaluated, woof, that's bad. And it only takes a few people to challenge any of the things any of the contracts that have been awarded in the last 8 years, and it falls apart like a house of cards. Forget the water systems, So yeah, I'm just hoping the system fails gracefully and allows for meaningful changes to occur. Because if we kick the can down the road too long in all of these areas, instead of biting the bullet and making uncomfortable decisions, we're going to end up in situations that we've never seen.
Well, you could end up like Joburg, where it's one government passing the hand grenade to the next government for the most part.
Because look, it's the hand grenade. Look, it's a good metaphor, because the pin was pulled long ago, but no one knows when it's going to go off, and we're starting to hear the fizzing, from inside the little device. And I do wonder if this electoral cycle, whoever's in charge is going to catch the explosion. Because, again, to circle back to the very first thing we mentioned at the top, well, one of the first things we mentioned at the top of this episode, which is Gareth van Onsselen's remarks about R1 trillion being necessary to refurbish the water infrastructure. Who's got R1 trillion? Who's got R1 trillion to save Johannesburg? And what does it look like if Johannesburg goes belly up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose an alternative
Like
would be
all of the whiteys moved to China. You just like that that sort of like oven glove shaped bit on the map that votes DA in there, right? Imagine that thing just sort of doubles overnight, and like that whole sort of southern, that southwest rural area just fills in with housing and low scale industrial developments, right? Like overnight, you just see that goomph.
Okay, well, my dog is getting very feisty in the corner of the room there. I'm not sure what she's on about. No, that was long ago. She's I have a dog who's like I don't know, not quite right in the head. She likes sparking at walls and whatnot.
Okay. Well, look, on that note, it is my dog's feeding time because I have to feed them later because one of them's very old and has to make it through the night, without the need to go outside. So yeah, no, I need to feed them now. But yeah, I think we've covered most of our necessary topics, and unless something very exciting happens in the world, while we've been talking, I think we've covered most of the items that need to be discussed.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks for coming on, Leo. It was good to hear the economic breakdowns because sometimes I just, I only have the bandwidth for so much of it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, the economic stuff is so dry. To be honest, when it's at this sort of stage of, I mean, like it's flatlined. So I mean, it's honestly not.
Do you know what I actually think makes economics dull? It's not sort of what's going on so much to speak. Is how much of the sort of there are millions of little signals, and you have to sort of like carefully pick through. Okay, well that one's going normal, and that's normal, and that's normal, and oh wait, hang on a second, there's something happening. Whereas with politics, it's very obvious. Pete Pompey has now said that he's going to adjust this policy, and you go, oh, right, now something's happening. Whereas with economics, like unless something really sort of tremendous is happening, you don't really know where the signals are, and it's a little bit more work to dig it out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mentioned it. I think whilst you dipped out for a bit while I was discussing it, but like there's a lot of frustration with the fact like economics isn't measured in quarterly reports. It's not even measured on a year-to-year basis. You have to look at decades of data to suss out trends, and unless something like COVID happens, where it's like, okay, well, I can understand why things shifted at that point. It's sort of something that you have to delve into. Why things are flattening out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like avalanches and sort of ski slopes and everything. Is the slope thick is it thick enough to ski on? Is it too powdery? All of those kind of weird little questions which you can't see until you can't see until you go up, dig a little hole, and do your compaction test. So yeah, let's see if we do or don't get an avalanche in the next 10 years. If anyone's willing to wait that long. Well, thanks for coming on, Leo, and a public thanks to Robert King, who's gone off to do more productive things. Yeah, cheerio, everyone. Good night. Good luck. Don't die. And
good night, everyone.
Yeah, keep your hat on. Cheers. Oh, wait.